Hey, folks, we are back with another episode of DramaQuest. This is another lore episode. We are joined once again by my sometimes on again, off again co-host for lore, the specialist, Gorlami, aka Elderos, aka Liverflap. Liverflap, what's going on?
Very nice to be back. Just watched the episode with you and Frank. It was great. I love that you had someone on that you weren't necessarily best buds with and also weren't necessarily mortal enemies with.
Yeah, well, we've become friends. I would call Frank like a very challenging but good friend of mine. Acquaintance. I don't know. Friend is like an intimate word almost. But I had a lot of fun doing that. We're obviously, me and Frank later this week are doing another part. We're doing part 2 of Cello. But it's so funny. Like, we knew that episode would make some people mad because of how they're characterized. And you would think it would be like people from Amtrak who are upset, but it's actually people from like little shitter guilds that did nothing. That are commenting, like trying to be like big boy guilds. Like, listen, we mentioned you only insofar as you were relevant because you teamed up with one of the guilds that mattered for one thing. Anyway,
the small dogs bark loud.
They do. They bark very loud. Okay. Anyway, for this, I want to thank our patron really quick. We have one new patron since last night's episode that I recorded, which will come out sometime before this, I assume. And that new patron is Melchior. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. Thank you very much for supporting the podcast. It means a lot. And thanks to everybody, because the outpouring of support through Patreon has been really incredible and way more than what I expected. But today, with no further ado, we're here to talk about one of, I think, the coolest and least well-known pieces of lore in EverQuest, Miragul.
I'm really glad you chose this, especially after last episode, when I asked you about who some of the big deceivers or villains or people who use subterfuge a lot in EverQuest were.
Yeah, he's definitely one of the big ones. We see him in game, but he's kind of got like a truncated role in the game. I think much later during House of Thule, you interact with Miragul again, and I mean that's like 10 years into EverQuest's life, maybe more. House of Thule, I want to say, was like 2011-ish. And EverQuest came out in 99. So he was real deep when he finally came back. And we're not going to touch on that really deep lore today. We're talking about like that golden era, that good stuff that people kind of remember from their childhoods or their young adulthoods. But before we dive in, we'll talk about our sources. Obviously, in-game sources, of course, are a big one. Miragul is involved in no less than 3 epic quests. If you don't already know, the Necromancer epic, the Shaman epic, and the Paladin epic all mention him. You might not know if you just like speed through, read ALA, and click trade to NPCs when you're doing your epics. But and we also have some data from our good old Game Master's Guide. This primarily gave us data because it gave us additional backstory on the epics that he was involved in. Then we have our EverQuest Realms of Norath, Everfrost Peaks book. This is really critical in our understanding of Miragul. Again, this book was published around 2002, so I consider it pretty close to the Golden Era. It's about as good of a secondary source as we can get. If it came out in like 2010, you'd have to take everything that came out in that book with a huge grain of salt, because who knows who wrote it and what their agenda or thoughts were, or if they consulted the original lore at all. But given that the time it was written and the contents jive really well with the rest of the game, which you'll see, I think it is an incredibly solid source. And I'm very upfront when I think a source is garbage. This is a good source, in my opinion.
So it's Miragul as Brad intended.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about the Oracle of Kaarnan, aka the guy with the nice robe and Ocean of Tears that you kill as soon as you hit level 50. We're going to talk about the Book of Turmoil, the founding of Necromancy. We will talk about Miragul's Highway. Some of you will probably know about it, especially if you play on emulator servers where the highway usually still works. Like I think Project Quorum, Miragul's Highway continues to work. If you've ever heard of the Firepot Room in Timorous Deep, that's part of Miragul's Highway. It's anytime that you basically click a fire pot to teleport to a different place. It was usually back in the day used by evil characters to avoid the docks and stuff. We've got, this touches on like the giant lore from last week. We're going to talk about Terrace Thule. We're going to talk about Vazel. I mean, he really goes in every direction. And there's some evidence to suggest even that Miragul was aware of Carafirm, the sleeper. So I can't wait to get into it. Liverflap, throwing it to you. Hot pass.
Yeah. When I think of of characters like Miragul in EverQuest or in lore in general, and these sort of the things you hear about, like the highway, the fire pots. It definitely creates this mystique around the game where you have to wonder, are things in there that other people are telling me? It's like that wonderful feeling of going on the forums and reading something and wondering, is this actually true? I need to go try it out for myself.
Yeah.
It reminds me, especially since you're lifting up your mug with your little red blue ash sprite on it.
Well, it's definitely red. Okay.
I'm talking generalities. It reminds me of like using strength on the truck at the SSAN to get Mew. You know, that was a playground rumor that you heard all the time as a kid. And I can imagine things like Miragul's Highway, especially since Miragul is in the game, and you know is really critical to these epic quests. I imagine that back in the day, this must have started a lot of playground rumors. Yeah. Zaide, I believe you have been involved in EQ or playing EQ since beta. That's something we've heard from you before.
I would love to say that I played in beta, but unfortunately I didn't. I started in '99 though, so during the classic era, as a young tot, I got to play EverQuest. It was right at the tail end of classic, I want to say.
Were you hearing a lot of these things about Miragul as a character, about the fire pots? Was this something that was going around the community as sort of rumors?
I heard about Miragul for sure. The fire pots were an absolute mystery to me. Like I never heard about that. The first time I heard about fire pots in EQ and like magical fire pots was definitely Timorous Deep. And at that time, it wasn't connected to Miragul for me. I think the first thing I heard about was probably like around the time that Payneal came out. I feel like that's when I started hearing about him. I feel like when I read about the erudites, maybe I saw little tidbits about him. What's the first thing that you think of? Like, what comes to your mind when you hear Miragul?
Voldemort for sure.
Voldemort, yeah, right, yeah, kind of has that feel.
He's like the Voldemort to Albus, you know, as Miragul is to Alcabor. Like that's immediately what especially when I think about something like the Plane of Knowledge and how we travel around using POK books. It's really similar sort of technology, if you will, to what Miragul essentially used with his fire pots, which is like that port key, you know, instant translocation sort of travel. So that's the image I get.
Without referencing anything that I've told you in the last 24 hours, do you have any theories as to why Miragul established the highway?
I am a lore junkie between you, Bob, lore horror galore. Actually has some pretty solid videos, Larry. So I do know that the fire pot, the highway, is very similar to kind of that player action that you were talking about. How do we travel the world? How do we go through places that are good aligned for evil races? And we already have some of those tools, like the catacombs or the secret wall in was that West Freeport that you can walk through. So am I kind of hitting the mark there?
I think that is 100% the game design reason, but the lore reason, there is a characteristic of Miragul, which I think we should wait till like near the end to touch on, about why he made the fire pots, which I had never heard until I read like 100 pages of Miragul lore in the last week or two to brush up on this. Okay, so let's start with his history, right? Miragul went with the people who would become the erudites when they left Kanos. Kanos was still small time back then, and they were following Erud, the father of the erudites. Of course, they took on his namesake. They became the erudites, and they founded the city of Eridin. Now, there is this excerpt from Miragul talking about what he thought. And anyway, the thing I want to draw attention to is that Miragul originally was a follower of Erud, and I think it could be said that he really respected Erud. But what happens near the end of Erud's life, well, I guess literally the end of his life is what it is, changes Miragul and changes his outlook on things. And I want to just actually go ahead and read something from Miragul's journal, one of his journals. and give some characterization. So if you forgive me, this is the first of a few times where I'm going to read directly from Miragul. Okay, here we go. I have decided to record the events of my life, for I intend to create for myself a life worthy of note. Of all else prior to this day, the day of Erud's passing, I shall not waste ink. So this is written the day that Erud died. My sole name, as befits my hereditary station, is Miragul. Until now, I felt determination without direction, ambition without purpose. But yesterday, a man perished, one to whom I've been favorably compared by several other masters. So already at this time, he's considered, a genius, probably. This man wore the mantle of leadership of a people, the garland of mastery of arts arcane, and a name that is now synonymous with his people and the city in which they dwell. Thousands hailed him as possessing the greatest mind the mortal world has ever known, a conceit that did not fall far short of the truth. So you could see here, I think these first lines tell you that Miragul has a tremendous amount of respect for Erud, at least as a fellow practitioner of the magical arts. Truly, Erud earned the world's respect, but now this remarkable man is but a corpse burning on a timber raft in the city's harbor. This great genius, capable of bending tremendous forces of magic to his will, lies dead, his body now ash, possibly feeding fish descended from those I saw netted in my youth. Where now is the mind and soul of this most accomplished spellcrafter? Resting in eternal tranquility or bathing in gold-flecked sea foam, depending on whom you ask. How utterly useless, how pusillanimous. This ineffectuality is not unlike the tradition of practicing but one of the three branches of magic, a convention I've seen secretly defied for the course. A convention I've secretly defied for the course of a year now. So, for those who don't know, in Eredin, tradition dictates that casters choose one of the three schools of magic: enchanting, sorcery, aka being a mage, or being a wizard. And you follow that for life. You don't. Once you specialize, there's no coming back, and you don't study the other arts.
Their specialization got raised to 200. They can't respec.
Right. Yeah. No respects. So he says in this note, by the time Erud dies, he's already been secretly defying that for a whole year now. We of Eredin hold the answers to 1,000 puzzles in our vaults and the power to take advantage of them. Yet we restrict ourselves to an absurd division of labor. So much waste, like the life of a great man who knew everything but how to continue living. Interesting, then, the prospect of several of my brighter fellows. Might we not adopt the arts of conjuration to the realm of those passed on? Rather than bother with the elements scarcely more intelligent than clumps of dirt or ash, we might learn the wisdom of the dead, or so I'm told. If they are dead, though, how much wiser can they be? But it occurs to me now, as Erud's remains sink finally, ignominiously beneath the waves, that my fellows may be investigating a useful line of research after all. Assuming their claims of success are not exaggerated, it would be interesting enough to communicate with the dead. But what else could be achieved? Could Erud himself somehow be returned to guide the city? What powers might his spiritual presence retain from his life? Could a conjurer force spirits like elementals into service? The ideas riddling my mind may be far too ambitious. I suspect little will come of it. For now, the challenge before me is simply to acquire every mote of knowledge. A small task. To make this acquisition of knowledge possible, I must defy the primary law, the bane of mortality. If I fail, may these words and my flesh join Erud's beneath the waves.
That is so chilling to think that Erud's greatest quote for knowledge is the greatest quest of all could be perverted like this. It sounds like they probably sat and, drank, I don't know, tiered all wine and talked this sort of thing over.
Yeah, I read it, and to me, it makes Miragul very sympathetic. Like, he's got very, for lack of a better term, human reasons, you know what I mean, to getting started on this quest. And you can kind of see how it started. At first, he's a guy like already who is arrogant, right? And who thinks the rules don't apply to him. So we have the recipe for this to start. He's like breaking society's rules because he thinks it's a waste, blah, 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 a little rebel. But you could tell like he respects Miragul. And when he thinks about conjuring the dead, the first thing his mind goes to is, could we bring Erud back to lead the people still? You know what I mean? Like, he's right there with it.
Do we have examples of things like that in game of necromancy specifically to bring a figure back?
I feel like I should know this offhand, but I don't. Who?
Because I can think of Veneral Sathir definitely thinking, like, you know, I'm going to lich myself.
Yeah.
I'm going to you know, conquer Kunark in the world. And Mayong kind of has done that or been planning that forever.
Yeah.
But that is really noble in terms of like the liches of the world.
Right. Yeah. And I can't think of one where someone was intentionally brought back to continue to do good things. Or great things. Yeah. And it's funny too, because we associate Miragul as the father of necromancy, but you could see that these thoughts were kind of in the zeitgeist of the erudites already, right? Like he's talking to other people. He doesn't even say it's his idea, right? This whole concept came from somebody else entirely, some of the other people that he's associated with. And from here, basically what happens is Miragul has been secretly the people Faznek Itral, the magician, Kazanos Limpal, the enchanter, and Uzanor, the wizard. And he's been doing all three schools simultaneously. Eventually, he begins delving more and more into this necromancy, and then he's betrayed. He's betrayed by one of his compatriots, and they reveal what he's done, and he has to quickly flee. He always plans to eventually leave Eridan, but he's got to flee much more quickly, earlier than he wanted, because he was outed. This sets off what would go on to be the whole war between the heretics and Eridan, but Miragul is not super involved in that. The whole time, he strikes me as a guy who he's got his goals, and he's not a loyal person. He rewards loyalty, but he's not someone who's going to pledge himself and his powers to an ideal or to a faction or to even a person. And so when things become inconvenient for him and they put him in a position where his ability to achieve his goal, which he's got, right? He's like, okay, this is not working for me. I'm out, right? Like his goal again is to acquire all the knowledge that there is. And to achieve that goal, he has to live forever. He has to have immortality. So immortality is almost like the secondary objective to enable the first objective, which is an easy task for him, in his own words, when not constrained by time and mortality.
You know, something I think about here is, I wonder what Erud would have said if he could read this. I wonder what his reaction would be, because I know we don't get a ton of characterization of Erud.
Yeah.
At least from my knowledge. But, you know, the namesake of EverQuest kind of comes from Erud's pursuit in the first place of knowledge.
Are you talking about like, yeah, definitely. It's like the idea of EverQuest.
Yeah. I wonder if Erud would view Miragul's ambition as misguided, or maybe just incredibly strong and needing to be harnessed.
Yeah, I don't know. We get so little detail on Erud specifically. I am challenged to imagine Erud having a particularly wise reaction, because wisdom is not one of the big things you associate with erudites in the first place, right? Like he's gonna have like a more academic sort of response. Like the wise person,
Erud's gonna debate you down. He's gonna show you why your plan is actually foolish, rather than trying to inspire you.
Right. Like you might think like this, you think of great people and you think Erud would like persuade him in that like almost Gandalf kind of way, even though Gandalf, right, we associate with, I guess, being a wizard in that. But Erud isn't going to be like, you're being too hasty and the way you're doing this isn't the proper way. He's gonna have like some facts, and maybe he's just going to confront him and say like, hey, this has to be the way that I'm laying down, or you're out, you know? I'm not convinced that Erud, were he alive, would have handled the situation differently than the city of Erud High Council handled it.
I wonder if Erud knew any of these sort of murmurings inside of Miragul's head. And, you know, since you said that one of his compatriots revealed him. Do we know who revealed him, and was it somebody from the Enchanters Guild? Because that seems thematically appropriate.
We do know who revealed him. So
the Masters of Illusion would reveal a fault.
I don't think we get to know their original like school. Yeah. But the person who revealed him is, I've got their name here somewhere. He's got so we'll eventually talk about it, but in his laboratory, he's got a room with all these pedestals on it. And on each pedestal is what appears to be a statue of a different person. And
in like Miragul's?
Yeah, in Miragul's menagerie. And each of those statues is actually the person frozen in time.
Oh, so that's like a hit list.
Yeah, like their body is stuck, but their minds are conscious, and they're just, going insane because they've been there for like hundreds of years. Like Miragul himself, spoiler alert, Miragul tries to become a lich, and it goes poorly. He's given bad information, and then his spirit and his mind become separated. So normally when you become a lich, you store your soul in a phylactery so that when your body dies, you just kind of respawn because your soul is still alive. But he didn't tether his body to his spirit, so his spirit was in the phylactery too, trapped. And as a result, for the last 300 years, at the time of classic opening, for 300 years, Miragul has been like not a mindless lich, but a primal being that cares only for avoiding death and no longer pursues learning.
Wow, that's like the greatest curse that you could levy on him.
Yeah.
Is getting between him and his goal. Well, when Miragul left Aerodin, how did he flee?
Okay, I've got it, by the way. Otmaro Fabrine is the person who exposed him. He was a wizard. And in D&D terms, this guy was a wizard and a necromancer. Like, he has 6 levels of necromancy. This is the time when he's working with Miragul. Then he betrays him, 17 levels of wizard. So dude is primarily a wizard who at one point dabbled in necromancy. And this is what Miragul has to say about Otmaro. Otmaro Fabrine, you grew disenchanted with the dark arts and attempted to betray me to the High Council of Aerodin, forcing my hand before the appointed time. I've never forgotten your treachery. Neither, I trust, have you. And he's sitting there, for hundreds and hundreds of years, frozen in time like that as a torture method. Now, Otmaro would go on to become part of the High Council of Aerodin in his time. You know what I mean? So he went on to great things after exposing Miragul, but Miragul got him in the end somehow.
So how does he get from Aerodin all the way to Everfrost Peaks? Like where's the connecting the dots there?
So once he flees and the Peniel thing happens, there's reports that he is what saved he saved the heretics from being destroyed in the explosion that took the whole, right? Reports on that are kind of conflicted. So as to whether or not he did, who knows? But he's well regarded in Peniel. He leaves the continent of Otis. We don't know how exactly he left. But every time he's traveling, he's building these fire pots so that he can travel back and forth easily. There's one in Toxulia Forest. There's one in the Kanos Catacombs. So now he never needs to do rudimentary travel between those places ever again, right? I believe that the next place he goes is Neriak. And he's going to go there in order to study with the Dark Elves, because they're kind of like, at the time of Miragul, the Dark Elves are all that there is for necromancy. Now, he says, he and his followers say that basically Miragul took what was a collection of dark rituals and ancient teachings that the Dark Elves used and turned it into what we now know today as modern necromancy. So he really brought it forward.
Because those rituals and teachings would have been directly focused on worshiping Inaruk, right? This would not have been like an academic focus. This would have been like a heritage for the Dark Elves, for the Teardal.
I don't know that. Remember that the Teardal do not love Inaruk. You know what I mean? Like, they hate him because hate is the thing. So they worship him in that way. I think they pursued necromancy probably just no one else was doing it. You know what I mean? There was no competition. There was nothing pushing it further, right? So they had what they had of necromancy, and there wasn't necessarily an impetus to focus on it and to push it in the way that Miragul did. Now, remember, Miragul, his background necessitates that he pursue necromancy in a totally different way. The Dark Elves live a long time, naturally, thousands of years. Miragul's got like 80 years, like a medieval human, right?
Make it count.
Right. He's got to go approaching this undead thing in a totally different way. And while he's there, he steals several artifacts from Neriak, and he's been hated, and they've sent assassins to kill him ever since that time. Now, I think after hundreds of years, people kind of like respect him too, but they still are not happy that he stole some of the items that were considered artifacts of the necromancers of that time. I'd have to like, pull them out of this big list of items to reference them. Hopefully I'll do it before the end of the episode, but right now I don't have them on me. But then he traveled all over the world. So he went and he would go in disguise before people even knew that necromancy was a thing that erudites even potentially practice. He was pretty much welcome everywhere. He followed the barbarians and learned from them, even though he made them very uncomfortable. They could tell he was evil by that point. He learned from them. He went and worked with the gnomes and learned tinkering. And they describe him as furthering their understanding of tinkering and machines beyond like what the current tinkering masters ever knew. Wow. And he told them before he left, like he taught the gnomes to tinker on living things and to tinker with the undead. And he's like, hey, make sure that you hide this, because I don't think that the other factions in Akadon would take kindly to this. Imagine yourselves instead as a dark reflection. Now, the Necromancer Guild in Akadon is called the Dark Reflection. So it's suggested that kind of he inspired the creation of the whole dark arts organization in Akadon with the gnomes. He no doubt studied Mayong. He's got a horn that can raise the dead that was supposedly given to a bard from Mayong. So probably, without too much more detail, probably a horn Mayong gave to one of the performers, like in Depths of Dark Hollow, he's got the performer there, probably something like that. And this horn can raise the dead. Miragul chooses to believe in his own writing that this horn was probably not created by Mayong Mistmore because it was too powerful. But I think Miragul is probably underselling Mayong a little bit here.
That's fascinating, considering the animosity between Mayong Mistmore and the Bards Guild of Antonica.
Yes. Now, I think there's going to be a Mayong episode one day, but personally, I've always thought that without doing a tremendous amount of research off the top of my head, I've always thought that Mayong hated the Bards Guild because they were basically the news on Norath, and any attention was bad attention for Mayong. He didn't want anyone to know about what he was doing.
What about attention for Miragul? Like, are there ways that Miragul tried to stay under wraps or stay hidden to pursue his necromancy?
Yeah, so Miragul, so much different than how Mayong operated. Mayong was like grandiose, you know what I mean, and attracting attention. Everything Miragul ever does is pretty much to stay under the radar. He goes places. He barely talks to people. You read his notes and people's notes on him, and they're like, yeah, this guy came and he said we had a shared contact. He was quiet, and he asked if we could work on something together. You know what I mean? That's how he approached the gnomes. And he never says like, oh, I'm this great thing, right? Until it's way too late in his career, and he's like a known entity. But he even somehow managed to get to Kunark. He learned from the Ixar, and they tried to kill him a bunch of times and were unsuccessful.
Sounds like it, correct.
He's got a room in the menagerie where he's got dragon statues, okay? And there are 5 dragon statues in this one spot, and they all have different colored jewels for their scales. They've got red, black, blue, and green. And red, black, blue, green, and white. And sorry, counting to 5 is hard, folks. I played a little too much EverQuest in my day. So he's got those 5 dragons, but then there's a 6th dragon statue that is prismatic. Now, I doubt it was Arendar that he saw. You know what I mean? It's not the dragon from Plains of Power. I think that Miragul had gained some understanding of the sleeper. This is the only prismatic dragon that's really introduced to us. Is Carafirm. So somehow or some way, Miragul knew about Carafirm, and I would bet if I had to guess, based on how Miragul operated, I would suggest that Miragul probably went to Sky Shrine. He probably learned about the histories of the Claws of Vishan in Sky Shrine somehow.
That's what I was going to ask you. Do we have any evidence that he's been to places like Velius, Luckland? Because he's like taken a trip around the world at this point.
Yeah. Some sources indicate that he had learned the way to traverse the plains. Now, if he did, it's remarkable because traveling the plains for a group of people or even an individual is such a significant event. Without divine intervention allowing you to enter them or something, or a portal already being open.
Yeah, like the Fulgrim stones.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Like the stones for Inaruk. Yep. And just think about like the fact that probably wouldn't have been able to even be used to access him so directly if it wasn't for Inaruk coming down in Kithgor Forest, right? Like the portal was already opened several times to Plain of Hate and probably made it easier to go there. So it's indicated that he traveled the plains. Like think about the Shissar, okay? The whole thing about the Shissar is that they know how to create rifts in the plains to travel into other planes of existence. It's like one of the chief reasons that they were cursed by the gods was because they killed a demigod. Think about the Rift Seekers in Omens of War. The Muramites enslaved the Rift Seekers because they could find rifts in space and travel through the planes. It's such a critical and rare ability. You know what I mean? So it makes me question Miragul's ability to actually do this, but nevertheless, like he's got this magic robe. It's this black shadowy robe with these silver runes on it, and the runes move around, and the runes are supposedly made of a stitching that came from an extraplanar being. It doesn't say what it is, but one way or another, Miragul had to get to a plane, right?
I'm guessing you don't just like loot that off of an orc pawn either. Like
right.
You can go and find that.
Right.
Like a world drop.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so he does this. He travels all over the world. He does two things. He gains knowledge, he shares a little bit of knowledge, and he steals shit. Basically everywhere Miragul goes, he has no qualms at all about theft. If he finds an artifact, something powerful and magical, he's going to take it, even if he has to murder people to take it. He's got a shawl, a cloak that came from like 3 generations ago, the Queen of Felwith. And he just mentions in passing that he got it the same year that she died. And previous to that, it was passed down the line of queens. I mean, like this sort of thing comes up a few too many times to be coincidence, in my opinion. Like Miragul is often finding things that came from people the same year they died.
This makes me think back to the beginning of the conversation. Is there any evidence to suggest that Miragul had something to do with Erud's death?
There isn't anything at all.
Okay. All right. Just check, because that's awfully convenient. It seems like that's sort of like the birth of Miragul as we know him, the heel turn.
I could see it. It's not outside the realm of possibility. I just don't know if Miragul was there yet. You know what I mean? I think he's still Tom Riddle at this point.
You think we should give him a little bit more credit? Yeah. I mean, that makes sense if Erud is so powerful and so influential that he could set, basically the course of destiny for multiple factions, multiple peoples, just with his death's reverberations into somebody as powerful as Miragul. Yeah. Which also makes me think of it. If I could call back real quick, you said tinkering on flesh on living beings with the gnomes. Yep. Is Miragul the reason that the gnomes have a clockwork king?
I don't know. I don't know. Later, that is retconned out, unfortunately, by the way, but we're going to ignore the fact that they retcon that.
That's one of my favorite pieces.
It's like the coolest part of gnomish lore.
Yeah, they don't have a lot, but that's pretty good. Okay.
It would be crazy. They don't give us any details, but the only time that I hear about working on living things is this excerpt of this group of gnomes that became the Dark Reflection working with Miragul.
Which, I think too, like maybe that is part of that uneasy sort of living situation with the Dark Reflection in Akhenaten.
Right, because they're sitting there, right, in the Minds of Malfunction.
Yeah, and it is not safe to go back there.
No, they'll kill you. Yes.
As a cleric or vice versa.
Yeah. But like they're not that hidden that the guards couldn't just walk down there and root them all out. You know what I mean? It's not quite the same as the Kanos aqueducts where you have to like go through several invisible walls and search the closed off sewer system.
Do they have some political power with some people, say at the top of civilization? I don't know.
Yeah. One day you and I will have to do an Akhenaten episode, and I bet the answer will come to is yes, that there's some kind of machination going on there. But for now, we can't say for certain. So
you were talking about this robe. You were talking about the different runes. Are they written in a specific language? Is there detail on that?
We don't know what the language is. It's what I could say is the language is not Old Erudin, because every time something around Miragul is written in Old Erudin, they like to mention it because it's like his native language is like the ancient language of the erudites, which is no longer really used. But Miragul himself, of course, is a talented linguist and can read many languages of his eras and often translates things back into Old Erudin as he works on them. Now, that robe, one of the things it does, which gets him in trouble a lot as he is traveling the world wearing this robe, it makes everything within like a mile of Miragul start to get sick over time. It drains their life energy. So at first, you're a little bit more susceptible to getting sick, catching a cold. If you get hurt, you're more likely for it to be infected. And as he's in a place longer, suddenly like 6 months in, crops will fail and you'll have famines. 6 months to a year, children start being born stillbirths, right? They're born dead. And Miragul in his writings is like, yeah, the robe was great, but it caused me a lot of problems. Usually after like a month in a place, the local cleric and paladin guilds start being like, what the hell's happening? You know what I mean? They start investigating. And so this robe, it takes all that life energy it's stealing and it uses it to slow the aging process of the wearer. So Miragul used that robe for a long time to extend his life as he's traveling. And this is the thing that makes me like Miragul less. Like everything else he did is kind of understandable. But just like the fact that Miragul is willing to just kind of like passively harm everybody around him, even super innocent things like babies, so that he can die a little bit more slowly, you know what I mean, while he looks for an answer, is like pretty scummy. It's pretty up there. The rest of the shit, studying the dead, like, killing people here and there. People get killed all the time in Norath. Not a big deal. It's probably not hard to find someone who is going to fight you to the death for some reason in Norath. So
yeah, opportunities have to hail.
Right. Some opportunities are just there easily, but the robe thing is very obviously like deeply unethical.
So there's this thing in Elder Scrolls lore. If we're talking about Sheogorath, who is the Prince of Madness, and Jiggalag at the same time. Don't worry about it if you're not into Elder Scrolls. People who are both crazy, but also people who are a little bit maybe inspired, like musicians, artists, might be called like touched by Sheogorath. Oh, they have a touch of Sheogorath in them. I wonder if people around Antonica or the places that Miragul traveled sort of had that common parlance of like, oh, things are going bad and they keep going bad. It's like Miragul's in town or something.
Yeah, no, seriously.
I wonder if there were phrases like that.
Yeah, I wonder. It would be good if they had developed the universe with Miragul in mind and he wasn't like tacked on later. You could definitely see that kind of stuff being in game.
Do you think that he was well known enough, or it sounds like his ability for subterfuge, for illusion, for disguise was really really strong in keeping him anonymous?
Yeah, I think in these early eras he was not super well known. I think especially in these early eras, people didn't put much stock into humanity in general. It was kind of a latecomer to the racial politics. They started out just as barbarians in the north. You did not associate the humans and humanity in general with magical prowess or intellect. Erudites were kind of new on the scene, you know what I mean? And they were off in this little corner of the world where they were more or less content to stay by themselves, um, and kind of learn. So he was sort of like the all the perfect elements came together for Miragul to be this mad scientist genius that wandered the world and flew under the radar. Everyone underestimates him implicitly because he's a human. Like elves live 1,000 years. He's going to live like 1/10 of that time at best. Everyone's just kind of like, yeah, what's he going to do? You know what I mean?
So how far did he get in his mission of knowledge acquisition, of becoming like this universal consciousness almost?
It's hard to say. Like obviously he became one of the greatest minds ever in Norath. We'll put it that way. But the knowledge thing, his goal of understanding everything is like an endless thing. So he could never really achieve that goal. Now for immortality, he came very, very, very close. So after he finishes all his traveling, I think the most significant event that happens in his journey is that he comes across in the Wrath Mountains. He's looking through the ruins of ancient keeps from the Ralosian Empire, and he finds a head that still seems to be intact. It's got skin and hair and everything on it. This is Zekam, and he picks the head up. Well, he doesn't pick it up because it's massive. It's a giant's head, but he looks at it and he realizes it's still alive, and he makes a deal with this giant head to preserve it and give it a constant supply of blood in exchange for knowledge. So he takes it to what would become his base of operations. He goes all the way to the frigid north. He basically is going to a place where he'll be left alone. And this is also when he abandons that robe, by the way. He just sort of sits it down in his collection of artifacts, because when you live in the frigid north, a robe that drains the life out of everyone in a mile doesn't do anything because there's no one alive within a mile of you, right? So he goes under the ice flows to create this cavern, and it was Zekam's knowledge that let him create this cavern. So let me rewind really quick and talk about Zekam. I forget if we talked about him during our giant episode, but if we did,
we mentioned him, I think.
If we did, okay, good.
Yeah.
So we have a little pre-knowledge here. Zekam was one of the original giants, and he became a general in the armies there. He was a talented wizard and warrior. And he's one of the very small number of giants who got to sit in council in the presence of the divine warlord Ralosek himself. So he's at the tippy top of the pecking order of giants. When the giants were in that final battle with the gods, fighting the Wrath Council and everything, new gods had come to the pantheon around that time. One of them was Nathaniel Mar, and Zekam found himself in one-on-one combat with Nathaniel Mar. Despite his power, it was a short fight. Nathaniel Mar chopped this dude's head off with one clean stroke, and for whatever reason, be it a curse or luck or what, he never died. He was just forever a living disembodied head. But he is the pure, unadulterated Ralosian giant. You know what I mean? He's got all the magical knowledge. He's intelligent. He's powerful. Everything. So Miragul asks him to give him that lore. And what he teaches Miragul to do is geomancy. That's the first thing he teaches him. Geomancy we only encounter, I think, one other time in EverQuest lore. There's one other geomancer, and that is Grieg. Grieg Vinificus from Grieg's End.
Grieg's End, yeah.
Yeah, Grieg is the person who took the Combine Empire to the Moon of Lucklin. He transported them, right? He's the great wizard, and he didn't know that they would be stuck there forever, and he went mad trying to find a way back. But anyway, the knowledge of geomancy was given to Miragul from Zekam. He used it for a totally different purpose. If you ever look at Everfrost Peaks and there's like this twisty-turny kind of cavern system where you find Miragul, this is kind of like the quickly constrained version of what Miragul's Menagerie was originally intended to be. Miragul's Menagerie and Miragul entirely were meant to be a big part of classic EQ. It was going to be a zone, Miragul's Menagerie, a dungeon out there in Everfrost Peaks. Multi-floor kind of dungeon experience. And the patterns that were carved into the earth with Miragul's magic allowed certain magical effects to be constantly present there because of geomancy. Like you just shape the earth in certain ways and mana moves through the place in controlled patterns. So like one example is that if you were in there in the lore of this, you always have flowing thought at a bare minimum, like flowing thought like 2 the whole time because of the way that mana flows. So this is really useful and provides a bunch of benefits to Miragul's kind of experimentation and stuff that he's doing down there. So Zekum teaches him how to do that. They finally get down there, and he makes a big, giant Futurama glass bowl kind of thing that Zekum's head goes into, and he feeds blood into it. And Zekum can't die, but if he lacks blood pumping through him, he gets like really fatigued and just is suffering. So he keeps a relatively consistent supply of blood flowing into Zekum. And in exchange, Zekum gives him the knowledge. Now they have a long-term plan where Miragul says he'll get Zekum a body, and Zekum will teach Miragul how to become a lich to live forever. And there's a long time before Miragul will go through with this because Miragul does not want to become a lich. He doesn't trust the process. He doesn't like the idea of being undead. He wants to exhaust every other opportunity for eternal life before he gives up his humanity, for lack of a better term.
Are there like other pursuits that we know he goes into before lichdom?
Yes. I'm trying to think of them all off the top of my head. There's a lot, but you only get some. But
good idea.
Yeah, the robe was one of the ideas. That's the most prominent one.
He's now called upon, so like an extraplanar being's remains, also basically a Relosian demigod. So it's not like he's slacking. He's really going for it.
Yeah, no, he's going hard. And what else does he do? I can't remember off the top of my head, but he's doing all kinds of shit that he can. And it's just not working. He's not coming up with a solution. He's getting older and older. And eventually he decides that like he's probably going to have to do this lich thing. I feel like I forgot to mention something here. There was something I wanted to circle back to. Well, maybe it'll come to me. Anyway, he goes through and he collects like the bodies of every type of race, everything, like planar beings. He's got like ancient skeletons. He's got Sarnak and Ixar skeletons and all their body parts preserved. So he's done like experiments on everything that he could possibly find.
Froglocks, of course.
Right. Except for he doesn't really have anything from the ocean. He doesn't have any like fish or mermaids or anything. For whatever reason.
It seems like a big blind spot.
Yeah. And he's getting older. He has a few apprentices over the years, and frequently he thinks they're getting too powerful, and so he's like, we're not cool anymore. And he lets them go or kills them.
Do we see any of these apprentices or know any of them in game?
In game, do we? No, I don't know if we do.
It's very
yes,
rule of 2 from the Sith kind of thing going on.
We do. There's a GM wizard named Sullen McMore in Everfrost Peaks, which was his last apprentice, basically. So he's there. And I don't know if he's used for anything. Let me see. He's like he doesn't do anything, but he is present in Everfrost Peaks in Miragul's area, which I think helps lend credence to this whole thing. But Sullen McMore is basically a human, not even an erudite, like an old school human, who Miragul has accepted, and he's worked with him for a long time. But Miragul has stopped trusting him because he worries that Sullen is going to try to kill him when he gets powerful enough, and Sullen has become quite powerful. Little does he know that Sullen is truly not trying to fuck around with any of that. He just wants to stick by Miragul's side. He knows that he will never be as brilliant as Miragul, and he wants to soak some of that benefit. You know what I mean? But he kind of pushes Sullen away, and Sullen is still there. He's just in a different floor of the laboratory and doesn't really get to hang out with Miragul anymore.
That's got to be a really hard thing working with Miragul. You know, let's say you're Zekum. Like, you know, there's going to be a day where you've taught Miragul everything that you know to teach it.
Right.
You're a captive audience for sure.
And you've like basically you've seen how he deals with people, right?
Yeah, he's a hyper pragmatist. He cuts things off like amputating a limb when he no longer needs it.
And that's Miragul's whole problem. That's what comes to bite him in the ass here, because Zekum is with Miragul long enough to see this characteristic. And at a certain point, he realizes the last thing that he has to offer Miragul is the knowledge of how to become a lich. And he comes to believe, truthfully or not, probably truthfully, that when Miragul successfully enacts this process and becomes a lich, well, suddenly Zekum is just a thing that costs resources and doesn't provide any benefit. Right. And and he's a witness that could trade that information to someone else. So Miragul has a total of three, besides Zekum, he's got a total of three other followers at this time. He's got Sullen, Mick Moore, and he's got a husband and wife duo who kind of worship Miragul. They worship him as they don't think he's evil. They consider them to be good, and they consider him to be good. And they think that he's just doing what is necessary to advance the knowledge of the world, right? So they just kind of accept how he is and think that that's the only way you could be if you want to accomplish greatness. So he banishes Sullen to a higher floor. He can no longer come down to the laboratory. He takes his other two followers and he puts them into a paralysis, suspended animation sleep, where they can be sort of aware, but they're just in a bed stuck there. They can't leave the room. They can't move. And they willingly did this. And it's basically because he doesn't want anyone to know that he's doing the lichdom thing, right? No one can know exactly how it works.
So they get cryo sleep, but Sullen just gets grounded.
Yeah, Sullen's just like, stay up there, boss. And maybe Sullen is just too powerful for that, right? The other two servants are very much significantly weaker. Miragul, in terms of D&D stats, if you're a D&D player, Miragul is a level 33 necromancer in a game that goes up to level 30. He's also a level 10 enchanter, mage, wizard on top of that. So he's super, super high level. And his servants are level 10 necromancers, the ones he put to sleep.
I was going to say he's 53 in the game, which at the time of Classic would be 3 levels above the level cap.
Right, exactly. So again,
he's a true boss.
Right. The book it's so well in line, you know what I mean, with the little tidbits, the scraps that we see in game, that I really begin to wonder if they actually just hey, author, here's the design document for the zone that we couldn't do with Miragul. Here's what we wanted to do with him. Have at it, right? And they just produced it as a D&D campaign for $20. But yeah, so he was intent on keeping this shit a secret. And finally he's like, okay, I'm gonna fucking die. You know what I mean? Every day he was getting more tired. He was still trying to gather knowledge, but he found himself out of breath. He found himself having issues with all the sort of things that we get as we get older.
He's got COPD.
Yeah. And so he's like, hey, we gotta, I gotta do this thing. And it's a ceremony that takes a full month that he has to do. He does it perfectly because he's Miragul. He does everything perfectly, right? He's very precise. And he does it exactly as Zekum taught him, and it goes wrong. And as soon as it goes wrong, he knows that he's been betrayed. And Zekum, Zekum and Miragul both know what happened, but the body that is Miragul doesn't know. You know what I mean? There's the spirit is the creative force and all the personality elements of a person, right? And that is separated from just the body with the knowledge and the primal instinct of fear and hunger and stuff that exists in the body now. So he could still operate. He still does shit. He goes to sleep or whatever. He eats, presumably, but he can no longer do any of the things. And the personality that we identify as Miragul is trapped in that phylactery as well. And then only a few days after this happens, Zekum senses a powerful presence in Miragul's lair. But he can't see it because he's stuck in that glass bowl, right? So he senses it, and then he senses it leave. And no one in the whole crew knows who it is. The other two people are still in their suspended sleep. They're stuck like that forever, ostensibly forever. Sullen is doing his thing in the upper floors. He's forbidden to come down, so he doesn't come down. And he knows something went wrong, but he can't do anything about it. Now, we learn, we'll learn in a little bit who the powerful force was. But we have to circle back to something else that Miragul did that I wanted to mention. One of his other attempts at immortality, which failed. Okay. He created a massive, well, it started out as small. He created like a hole in reality and was able to stretch it to create a negative spirit energy field, sort of. And it was growing, constantly growing. And what it would do is it was kind of like the robe, but it was a field that grew all on its own. And it was draining the life out of everything. Like it would destroy trees. If a mammoth walked through it, they say like in a couple minutes, the mammoth would come out of the shroud and it would be 20 years older. And the barbarians start having like terrible nightmares. And they sense this, the barbarian shamans. So they're like, oh shit, what's happening? And they go and they investigate and they see, and they try to see what they could do with their magic, but they can't do anything with it. And finally, the tribunal sends a vision down to one of the shamans. It was actually supposedly the first Heyoka, the first like high shaman of the barbarians. And they show him what he has to do. And he crafts this magical spear. And he does all these tests with the tribunal to prove that he's worth it. He's tested by the spirit forces. There's like a bunch of spirits that we don't really talk about in EverQuest, very much like Drinal and a few other spirit deities. So he's tested by them. And finally he's ready. And he tells the barbarian like leadership, like, hey, I received a vision. I can handle this. Meanwhile, this orb of negative spirit energy is just spreading across Everfrost slowly but surely. And what he does is he can go and he takes this spear, which we know of as the Spear of Fate, the Shaman Epic, and he's able to slice a hole into it. And it's like, if you could imagine, like, it was like another plane was encroaching upon Norath and spreading through it, right? And slowly taking all the energy out. So he's able to slice a hole in this and stop its growth. And it goes back into like this tiny little pocket back in Miragul's lair. So that failed. And that was sending all that life energy. It would eventually consume all of Norath if not stopped. And it would send it all to Miragul. He also supposedly created the Scythe of the Shadowed Soul, aka the Necromancer epic. So, by the way, Thalgr was the barbarian who created the Spear of Fate. We'll talk about that in our epic video on that. And then Kazin will later try to pursue immortality via the Scythe of the Shadowed Soul. He thinks he could do it better than what Miragul did, but Miragul created that scythe supposedly with the intent of being able to take something and just restore youth to it. But instead it had the opposite effect. Like he took it to Everfrost and he tried it on a mammoth and it just fucking turned the mammoth into a pile of bones. It had the opposite of the intended effect. So those were two of his failed attempts. But here's the thing. He never fully sealed that distortion, that planar hole that he created with that earlier attempt, the mantle of negative spirit energy. And there was always secretly something on the other side watching. And when he did this month-long ritual, and whatever was on the other side of that could feel the power of Miragul had faded because he had failed.
Oh, wow.
It came through. All these specters came through, glass specters. And it turns out that they were servants of Terras Thul, the goddess of nightmares. Now, glass specters, what they try to do is they try to force you to make a deal. They want to make pacts with you. And if you agree to the pact, you're like bound to it. The way it works is like you agree to something, some kind of monkey's paw kind of shit. And if you don't do it, you start to have these nightmares. And the nightmares get worse and worse and worse until suddenly like your whole spirit is consumed and you go to the plane of nightmare, leaving behind just a body. And you're trapped in the plane of nightmare forever. So they're trying to get Miragul to make a deal. Now, Miragul obviously is like, they know he's vulnerable. He's not his normal self. But lucky for Miragul, fear is like the only thing left in him. And he's like, I'm not fucking around with you guys. But basically what he could do with this was before they came through, he could lay a race of something. Like he could put a goblin around this hole and he would have like archaic runes around it. And they'd be trapped in this right next to this planar hole. And they'd be trapped in like a stasis kind of sleep. And something would tear away at their dreams. Obviously, now we know it's Terras Thul and her servants. And anything that belonged to the same race as that entity, Miragul could see into and affect their nightmares. And so his plan was to get something of all the major races, and then he could control the nightmares of everything. But It couldn't just be anyone. It had to be like some kind of divine spellcaster of that race, right? So it had to be particularly good candidates. And he never got to finish it before all this happened. And then the Glass Spectres came through. Now they still want to finish it. They want to do it because then they can turn all of Norath into like a waking nightmare for Terras Thul. And that's kind of the situation now. It's been sort of taken over by the denizens of Terras.
So he really fucked around and found out with nightmare energy.
Yeah, it really went poorly for him. Now, before he did the phylactery thing, he came up with one other solution, one other thing that could make him immortal, but he kind of came up with it too late. He knew he wasn't going to live long enough to execute the other plan. His last plan for immortality was apotheosis, which is to become a god.
I was thinking that the whole episode, like, when does this guy try to convert to godhood? Because that's like, there's two things at the end of the road of knowledge, right? You either have the knowledge of your own death, or you have the knowledge of your own, divinity.
Right. And we know that he knew of Mayong, right? And Mayong did achieve apotheosis. Spoiler alert. So Mayong actually did it. He did what Miragul wanted to do. He became,
spoiler alert.
Yeah, he became a god of sorts. But yeah, Miragul was just too late. He was constrained. Mayong was always sort of a divine thing. There was always something weird about Mayong, so he definitely had massively more time than Mayong or than Miragul did to pursue that. One sec. He had a lot more time to pursue it than Miragul did. So
between magical artifacts, necromancy, lichdom, essentially
extraplanar fucking around and stuff.
Extraplanar, trying to infect the dreams of religious figures in order to spread his influence upon entire races and worship systems. And now we're finally at fuck it, I'll be God.
Right. Yep. And he even, his final note before he does, he's keeping journals this whole time. His final note is this: at last, all preparations are complete. Bizanos and Alarmba sleep. Zekum is fed. Those are his two servants he put into that slumber, and Zekum is the giant head. And the ritual's components await me in the summoning chamber. My next entry to this volume shall, no doubt, be the most interesting to date. Tonight, centuries of life come to an end, and an eternity of life begins anew. My past achievements are as nothing compared to what lies ahead. May the gods witness my rise and prepare a place at their table for my assured apotheosis. There was never another entry.
Just to clarify, this is already after he tried lichdom, was fooled by Zekum, so he's still feeding Zekum as a pet?
No. So he found out, he came up with the idea for apotheosis, but it was too close to when he would just naturally die. He wasn't going to have a time to pursue it. So his plan was to become a lich, and from his time, once he had successfully become a lich, then he could full bore go towards apotheosis.
Gotcha. Okay.
And now that he got, what happened means Zekum is never fed. His servants are never awoken. All that exists is Sullen up on the top floors. But Sullen has made some kind of deal with these glass specters. He made a pact, and whatever that pact is, we don't know. But he can't go down there to help Miragul.
That's probably part of it.
Yeah, they probably don't want Miragul to be helped, right?
Yeah.
So, Sullen, what he starts to do is he starts to release these kind of abominations, these horrors that had been created by Miragul out into Everfrost Peaks on purpose, so that some adventurers will be drawn in, not so he can kill them or anything, but he can't go down and help. He's trying to find people, a group of powerful people, to be like, hey, can you go fix this shit? You know what I mean? He thinks that all they need to do is bring the phylactery back to Sullen and he can fix it. What he doesn't know is the Oracle of Kearnan already came in just a few days after the failed procedure, and he stole the phylactery.
So that wasn't the presence, though, right? The presence.
That is the presence.
Is the presence?
The Oracle of Kearnan is the powerful presence.
Wow. Okay.
Now, the Oracle of Kearnan worships Vizel.
Never heard of him.
Vizel is a demigod. Importantly, Vizel is an erudite demigod.
Interesting.
She was raised up. So she has already kind of done what Mayong or what Miragul wanted to do.
There's too many M name bad guys.
I know.
But yeah, okay. So how was she able to achieve apotheosis and he wasn't?
So here's what we know about Vizel, basically. Just a quick snippet. She's an erudite. She lived among those who were ousted by the High Council of Eridan, so she was a heretic. During her lifetime, she was dedicated and a devout follower of Khazak Thul. Through a combination of religious zeal and prophetic visions, she was stripped of any semblance of sanity. She became totally insane. She was lifted up by her deity and given her own domain. The power of her madness shaped it into the semblance of Old Payneal after its destruction. So, for whatever reason, Khazak Thul chose to raise her up. That's all we know. And who knows what he looks for, but probably the desire to become a god is not one of the elements that he looks for, right?
And so the Oracle of Karanon is worshiping this like almost puppet figure of Khazak Thul.
Well, I don't know if I would call her a puppet, but I mean, she's got her own divinity now. You know what I mean? And it's kind of, it is what it is. Now, Khazak Thul has a pretty big family. He's got Moral Thul, the god of dreams, Teres Thul, the god of nightmares, goddess of nightmares. He's now got Vizel, who's just like a demigod underneath him. He's got himself. I think there's probably more Thuls out there. So there's like a big like syndicate of Kazacites there, for lack of a better term. And they don't all get along. But I think
I always just thought of the Oracle of Karanon to be like a good guy.
I don't. Well, so here's the thing. He's an oracle, and Vizel's whole thing is she went mad. She was on the side of evil, but she sees the future. That's her thing. And since he's an oracle, it kind of goes together all right.
So it's very like amoral. It's just about like the function of seeing the future.
Yes, and I would probably doubt that as originally conceived, that was what the Oracle of Karanon was, right?
Sure, yeah.
Otherwise, he would be the Oracle of Vizel. But whatever was the plan with the Oracle of Karanon in 1999, somebody dropped the ball somewhere, and that shit never got finished, right? Because he asks the players for the Tome of Ages, right? Is that what it's called?
Yeah, I think there's a number of tomes, but Tome of Ages is one of them.
The Tome of Ages is the combined book with all the books. So like there's only 2 books you can turn into him from the Tome of Ages. But there was a secret sect of dark elves called the Dal, the DAL, who created this Tome of Ages. And then to make sure that no one could ever have the whole tome of this forbidden ancient history and lore, they chopped it up into different books and spread them all over the world. To get the tome, the Book of Scale, you have to kill Nagafin and Vox because they each have half of it. The burnt and torn frost-covered books can be merged. They form the Book of Scale, which is it's like 1/5 of the Tome of Ages. The other book is the Book of Turmoil. You could do a quest to get the Book of Turmoil. Each of these talks about an age of the history of Norath. The Book of Turmoil, obviously the Age of Turmoil, which I think is kind of the age that you're in right now. I forget.
I mean, that would make sense.
And then, so if you turn in the Book of Turmoil to the Oracle of Karanon in game, you get EXP and faction hip. That's it. You don't really get anything else because it's incomplete. It's an incomplete quest. Yeah, if you turn in
Book of Monuments, Elders, Blood, and then one that's lost.
Okay, well, there you go. Yeah. So if you turn in the Book of Scale to him, he gives you Miragul's phylactery, which is part of the other epic quest that he's involved in. The Paladin Epic. So part of getting the Fiery Avenger, not the Defender, the Avenger, you have to turn in Miragul's robe and head to Intia Akira in Plane of Sky, a famous paladin who hoped to kill Miragul but was never able to succeed in that endeavor. So to do that, you have to bring Miragul back, which means you have to get his phylactery. And his phylactery, even in game, is owned by the Oracle of Karanon. And if you were to go in the originally intended Miragul's lab, right, in Miragul's menagerie, in the place where the phylactery was supposed to be, there would just be 2 crystal tears. which is hinting at the location of the thief of the phylactery, the Ocean of Tears.
Mm.
Now, why would the Oracle, having the most powerful necromancer in the world's phylactery, why would he go to the Ocean of Tears? What do you think?
I would try and think about why anybody goes to the Ocean of Tears.
This is all going to come together.
I could imagine that it would be to not be found. Fire pots are in TD, so I don't think it has to do with that. I don't think it has to do with the giants, sea furies, which we found out actually were the giants that Praxis cursed. Well, what else is out there?
Here's the thing. There have been all these hints throughout Miragul's life, okay? The fire pots, the fact that he is an erudite, and the erudites, who do they worship?
Praxis.
They worship Praxis, right? They worship the Ocean Lord, okay?
Yeah.
But they're like, Praxis is like arguably a holy god. Like there's clerics and paladins. Like there's a whole deep water knights order dedicated to him.
Yeah, very, very wisdom-based god.
Right. And the Triumvirate of Water, right? They are key to the cleric epic, even in Kunark. So
Yes,
the water's all there. He has every type of being's corpse and body parts in his lab, except for aquatic creatures.
Except for aquatic creatures. Okay.
Miragul is afraid of the ocean.
Interesting.
He has a phobia of the ocean. He made the fire pots so that he wouldn't have to ride on a boat. He doesn't have to go near the ocean.
Huh. I guess one of the things he mentions about Erud as well is like his apparent disdain for ending up as fish food.
Right? His corpse went into the ocean. It's where the thing that it all circles back to this. Like he doesn't want to live that life. He's the opposite of all that. He doesn't even like being called an erudite because then like he's just a denizen of this guy, right? He's just like, you know, he doesn't want to be lowered to
inherently connected to Praxis, inherently connected to that journey across the water that got them to Otis in the first place.
You know, now every phylactery has a different kind of weakness, and the weakness of Miragul's phylactery is ocean water. It's what you could use to destroy the phylactery once and for all.
So the Oracle of Karnan is kind of like holding a dead man's switch.
Yeah.
Over Miragul's body until he can find somebody who he deems worthy, or do we think that this is just really a trade?
I think for him it became a trade. Maybe I think he probably we have no information on this really, but I would assume that he had a vision from Vizel about doing this, and so he did it. I don't see any other way he could know where Miragul was hidden. And trust me, there are about 1 billion traps on the way to the bottom of Miragul's menagerie that he would have to navigate through. And he was able to do all that. So I think he received a divine vision from Vizel showing him this. Now, why she would orchestrate or suggest this, who knows? But maybe his fate was sealed the moment he decided he wanted to pursue apotheosis. Historically, gods don't like it when you do that. There's another. So remember, as a erudite, the default worship of an erudite heretic would be Khazak-Thul. We can assume, and there's also statues of dread, fright, and terror in the menagerie. So we can assume that he has some level of devotion to Khazak-Thul. Probably not much because of the nature of Miragul, you know what I mean? But until he decided that, okay, I'm going to be my own god, I'm going to be the guy, he probably had a thing for Khazak-Thul.
Relationship.
Right.
A situationship.
Right, yeah, they had a situation. And there was an entanglement there.
Oh my god. That's it, yeah.
And now who's another person that worshipped Khazak-Thul, that was created by Khazak-Thul, that decided that they were a god?
Veneral Sathir.
I don't think Veneral saw himself as a god, to be honest.
He was lichy, yeah.
Yeah. He did want to go the lich route, but I don't think he saw himself as a god. But who did? Emperor Sraja.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Even to this day, they look at him as a god for the Shisar. And look what happened to them. You know what I mean? So I think Khazak-Thul and the Thul family as a whole probably are apt to take direct measures when someone that was supposed to worship them decides like, no, I'm going to be a god.
Yeah, because this isn't just Kazakh now. This is Terrace kind of stepping in.
Right.
When,
yeah.
when an opportunity presents itself.
I didn't even put that together. Like Terrace is coming in, attacking him. Vazel is demigod of Kazakh Thule, probably gave the oracle the information, the vision he needed to do this. It all kind of comes together to me is in that way now that you said that.
You know, I find it really interesting that Kazakh, I made mention of this earlier, kind of intentionally. Kazakh has the puppet strings on him as a piece of loot.
That's true.
And, you know, I wonder how much fear has to do with the control of power of these upstarts.
Yes.
We have multiple examples now of people being drawn to power and amassing it and kind of ending up at the bad end of the stick when it comes to the Thule family. Are there other examples of, well, I guess another example I could think of would be Eridun.
Eridun,
one of the most powerful rangers, who actually went to fight Kazakh Thule, ended up getting slapped down by him, right?
I mean, he did in the comic book. That's
what I'm referencing.
Yeah, in this good old comic book, Eridun, the outrider of Khurana, does go fight Kazakh Thule. But in the lore in game, the person who goes to fight Kazakh Thule is the worshiper of Quellius, Arak Altil. And that's why his skeleton is still in Plane of Fear. He took the fiery defender and he decided to attack the forces of evil, which was anathema to the concept of a defender, right? He was supposed to be there to protect people, and he took it on an offensive mission and was pretty much cursed for it.
I'm surprised we never got like a god of ambition.
Yeah. Well, to the degree that we do, it would be Solasek Ro. He's like outlined as being very ambitious and having that kind of gist. But yeah, we don't really actually have a god of that directly.
Hey, a little bit off topic, but I want to ask you something last episode that I forgot to.
Okay.
When it comes to ambition, because there's so many of these stories of, you know, like who remind me were the Relosians that conquered another plane in the name of Ralosek as a way to prove themselves?
Yeah. Well, the name of the guy is Murdunk.
Murdunk, that's right. It seems to come up over and over and over, like proving yourself, worthiness. We do it as players in Planes of Power as well, when like we go and fight the Mar family, basically to prove ourselves in the Halls of Valor.
Yeah.
If you were Murdunk, what plane would you have chosen to invade to show Ralos that you were badass? Because it seems like Earth. What are you gonna do? You know, that was a rough dice roll.
Yeah,
you hit the ward, you hit the infinitely spawning Wrath Council.
I would have invaded Drunder.
What's Drunder?
It's the fortress of Zek.
So you would have invaded Zek's homeland to prove yourself to Zek.
Yeah, I would have been like, hey, let's see what's up, man.
Interesting.
So you mentioned the puppet strings on Kazakh Thule. Super interesting tidbit here. You know, in Plane of Mischief, they have the theater with all the puppets of the gods.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
There's one puppet missing.
Is it Kazakh?
It's Kazakh Thule.
Of course.
And the one in Plane of Fear in Classic has puppet strings. Does that imply to us that the god that we fight in Classic as Kazakh Thule is actually just the puppet from Bristlebane's? I mean, what else could it possibly imply, right?
Yeah, because you don't find that on the Avatar.
Yeah, no, he's still got the puppet strings from Plane of Mischief, man. They're still right there on him.
Does either that, or does that imply that any of the deities in that puppet show, have some level of power differential when it comes to Bristlebane? How strong is Bristlebane? Is where I'm getting to with this.
Yeah, I don't know. He's not very strong traditionally in Era. Like he was duoed in Lucklin or Pop by was it Irontail? It was a monk and druid combo from Triton back in the day was able to duo Bristlebane using basically a mana stone. Like the druid would be bound in Bristlebane's room while they were fighting it, and the monk would kite and throw shit at him and fight him that way. And whenever he got low on mana, the druid would port himself to Antonica, mana stone down, and then gate back.
Love that.
Yeah.
Mana stone hijinks are something else. I wonder, things like the Mana Stone, do we have any suggestion that these are like divine pieces, like divine artifacts? Because they're incredibly powerful.
Some we do, but not with the Mana Stone. I think the Mana Stone was really well lined up with the Evil Eyes and their kind of heritage. And then it just ended up being, it's like the Black Lotus. Like, oh shit, we didn't think it was going to be that powerful. You know what I mean? Like, we made it legendary.
Well, that was bananas, man. That I was not ready to know that Miragul had hydrophobia.
I don't think it's all water. I think it's just the ocean water.
Just the ocean.
Yeah. I think the whatever the weakness is of a phylactery is a secret. No one knows it except for the person who creates the phylactery. And I don't think that they choose it. I think it's something innate to them. And so the fact that his was ocean water is also another indicator that he is afraid of the water. And, you know, the book spells it out directly. You know what I mean? That he's afraid of the ocean, which makes sense given everything you know about him. And then I think we've kind of put together something entirely new here, unless the future EverQuest lore spells it out. When you said that, you know, with Terrace invading the realm and Vizel probably giving the visions to the Oracle, I think that might be something that, you know, I have at least never seen it anywhere else before.
Well, to me, it makes sense that if you're worshiping something that, you know, has super strong divination powers, you're probably going to believe it when they say, hey, do X, Y, or Z.
Right.
And to give something like the phylactery, like you said, of the most powerful necromancer away to an adventurer who happens to have a tome, like that seems like quite a hefty trade.
Yeah.
And like you said, to even go into the menagerie in the first place, survive it, and retrieve it. So yeah. I wonder if there is some sort of, you know, divine fuckery at play there, where that is a Thulian influence on making sure that the phylactery, the adventurers, you know, the main character, essentially Solon, what he is told to do by the Nightmare, the Crystal Shades, all to kind of spell Miragul's demise.
Yeah.
Or at least take away some of his power, some of his influence. Because the menagerie itself is a testament to his legacy.
Right.
The fact that there are all of those artifacts, all of those specimens there, even if he's not present, you got to think like that. That's his hoard. That's his bank of different, you know, bag of tricks that he could pull out if he were to retain his power.
Yep. And I think, you know, if he were ever to, you know, if he was ever able to like become whole again, without a raid force of people standing right there to kill him, I think the plot line would prove successful for him. I think he would be able to reach apotheosis too. Because we have evidence. I think probably for sure Mayong did it. Now he didn't meet a lot of success after he became a god, but he was able to do it. And then Zabuxaruk potentially did it. I don't know if Zabuxaruk was raised by Drinnel, or not Drinnel, by Drussel Rowe, or if he achieved it himself and then studied under her. But Zabuxaruk was another person who was once a mortal and became a god. So
Miragul got lich or died trying.
Yeah. That's a good one. Got lich or died trying.
There you go. That's my one for the episode.
All right, folks. Well, I think will about wrap up the episode. I know we owe you lore on Valkator and Kazel because we forgot to mention them during the Giants episode. That'll come out at some point. Maybe we'll do an episode where all the shit that we forget in a couple episodes, we combine them into one. But I hope you guys enjoyed this talk about Miragul. I'm sure we missed something because there is really a lot about the guy.
Yeah, if you got something, get in the comments. Let us know if you think we're right or wrong or whatever.
Yeah, tell us where we're dumb.
Yeah, specifically. Timestamp it.
Right, yes. Yeah, I really like... I was talking to Liverflap about this before before we started. Basically, like, I think a lot of things were added to the game without clear lore implications or necessarily attachments to things. And my opinion is, like, for the sake of like verisimilitude, once something is put into the game world, you look at it as a product of the world, and you decide how it came to fit in that world, right? If there's no lore saying what it is, then that means if you come up with a good enough interpretation, that can sort of be your canon, because there's nothing that says you're wrong. Now, later on, they can come and retcon things however they'd like. It is their game after all, but there's space. There's gray areas in EverQuest. There's space where it's open to player interpretation, and I think that's the best part.
Yeah, I agree. That's that mystery where you read something that just it doesn't quite make sense. Like the Oracle of Karnon, your faction gets worse with the Oracle of Marud. Who the fuck is Marud?
Right, doesn't exist anywhere in game in any form or fashion.
Comes way later in EverQuest 2. There's a single character that they add in. But all of that time between 1999 and EQ2 in 2005, that's a lot of time for you to do what Zaide is saying and develop your headcanon. I think it's the healthiest part of the game. Yeah. I think it's the thing that makes EverQuest something that can always be talked about.
100%. All right, Liverflap, thank you for another one.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Anytime, and hope to talk to you again.
Yeah. Oh, and yeah, I guess if you guys didn't know, the giant caveman dude who was on the last episode is actually the same person on this episode.
Yeah,
haircut and shave and stuff.
It's amazing. Yeah, what grooming can do for your appearance.
Yeah. Or I think we both got a haircut since last time.
Yeah. Didn't coordinate it at all.
No.
I will say, outside of these episodes, there's like another hour that Zaide and I just like talk and bullshit about lore.
Yeah.
So there's still so much to talk about.
Yeah. All right, folks. Liverflap, Zaide, and DramaQuest, LoreQuest.
Adios.